The stars looked cold and distant as Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship. His forearms moved slowly as he checked the displays around him. The ship was huge, bigger than most human cities, and it gleamed with the kind of metal that could turn energy weapons into nothing more than bright lights. 200 ships just like it floated in space behind him, all waiting for his orders. Kextar's skin was covered in dark green scales that moved when he breathed. His eyes were large and yellow, and they never seemed to blink. When he spoke, his voice came out as a low hiss that the translation machines turned into words that other species could understand. Right now, those words were full of confidence and pride. "Look at these reports," he said to his second-in-command, Captain Yexenal. "The humans have been in space for less than 60 years. They have maybe 50 worlds with people on them. Their ships are made of simple metals, and they still use chemical rockets for some things." Captain Yexenal looked at the data on his screen. The information had come from Zephyrian spies who had been watching human space for months. Everything they saw told the same story. Humans were new to space travel. They were weak. They would be easy to defeat. "Their weapons are primitive," Yexenal agreed. "They still use solid projectiles for many of their guns. No energy shields on most of their ships. No quantum processors in their computers. They are like children, playing with toys." Admiral Kextar made a sound that was like laughter but came from deep in his throat. The Zephyrian hegemony had conquered 17 different species in the last 10 years. Each time, it had been the same story. The aliens thought they were strong until they met Zephyrian technology. Then they learned what real power looked like. The humans would learn too. Far away from the Zephyrian fleet, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his chair on the monitoring station orbiting Kepler 442b. The station was small compared to the warships that bigger planets had, but it was home to 37 people who kept watch over this part of human space. Jake had been doing this job for 5 years, and most days nothing happened. Ships came and went. Traders brought goods from Earth and the inner colonies. Families moved to new worlds looking for better lives. Today felt different. "Sir, I'm getting something strange on the long-range sensors," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair that she kept tied back while she worked. Her fingers moved fast over the control panels as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. "What kind of strange?" Jake asked. He had learned not to ignore his crew when they said something was wrong. In space, strange things usually meant dangerous things. "Mass displacement at the edge of the system," Amy said. "Really big mass displacement, like someone just dropped a small moon out there." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Ships made displacement when they came out of faster-than-light travel, but nothing made displacement that big unless it was huge, or there were a lot of them. "How big are we talking?" 200 contacts, sir. Maybe more. They're too far away to get good readings, but they're big. Each one is putting out the same displacement as one of our heavy cruisers. 200 ships. Jake had never heard of any human fleet that big. The biggest fleet Earth had ever put together was maybe 30 ships, and that was for the war against the Centauri rebels 5 years ago. This had to be aliens, and aliens with that many ships probably were not coming to talk about trade agreements. "Send a message to Earth Command," Jake ordered. "Priority 1. Tell them we have unknown contacts in the system, possibly hostile." "Already on it, sir," said Amy. The waiting was the worst part. It took almost an hour for the alien ships to get close enough for the station's sensors to get a good look at them. When the images finally came through, Jake felt his mouth go dry. The ships were beautiful in a way that human ships never were. They looked like they had been grown rather than built, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to glow with their own light. Each ship was covered in what looked like crystal formations that sparkled even in the darkness of space. They moved, in perfect formation, as if they were all controlled by the same mind. "Sir, they're trying to contact us," Amy said. "Put it on screen." The display in front of Jake flickered, and then showed the image of something that definitely was not human. Admiral Kextar filled the screen, his yellow eyes staring right at Jake. When he spoke, his voice was deep and full of the kind of confidence that came from never having lost a fight. "Inferior species of Terra. I am Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian hegemony. Your worlds will be absorbed into our empire. Your people will serve as laborers in our industrial complexes. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Amy had gone pale. The other officers were staring at the screen like they could not believe what they were hearing. These aliens were not here to talk. They were not here to trade. They were here to take everything humans had built and turn humans into slaves. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force," Jake said. His voice was steady, even though his hands were shaking. "We don't surrender to anyone, and you just made a very big mistake." Admiral Kextar's mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. "Your bravado is amusing, human. Watch as we demonstrate the price of resistance." The transmission ended and Jake was left staring at a blank screen. Around him, his crew waited for orders. Outside, 200 alien warships were moving toward the human colonies, their weapons already beginning to glow with deadly energy. Jake knew that his little monitoring station could not fight those ships. The station had some defensive weapons, but they were meant to deal with pirates and smugglers, not a full military fleet. If the Zephyrians wanted to destroy the station, they could do it without even slowing down. But Jake also knew that sometimes the most important thing was not whether you could win a fight. Sometimes the most important thing was making sure the other side knew you were willing to have that fight. Humans had been having that conversation with bullies for thousands of years, and they had gotten pretty good at it. "Amy, send another message to Earth Command," he said. "Tell them the aliens are hostile and they're coming this way. Tell them we're going to delay them as long as we can." "Sir, with respect, we can't delay them. They'll go through us like we're not even here." Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Maybe, but they'll know we were here, and that's going to matter." The message from Captain Morrison reached Earth in less than 6 hours. It traveled through the quantum communication network that connected all human colonies, jumping from relay to relay until it arrived at the massive space station that orbited above Earth's moon. The station was called Luna Command, and it was where the best military minds in human space worked to keep their people safe. Fleet Admiral Lisa Parker was in her office when the message came through. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She had been fighting pirates and rebels for 20 years, but she had never faced anything like this. As she read the report from the monitoring station, she felt her blood turn cold. 200 alien warships, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. An admiral who talked about making humans into slaves. A species that seemed to think conquest was just another day's work. Lisa walked quickly to the command center, her boots making sharp sounds on the metal floor. The command center was a huge room filled with displays and control stations where dozens of officers worked to coordinate the defense of human space. Right now, every screen was showing the same thing: the Zephyrian fleet moving toward human colonies like a dark storm. "Get me Admiral Chen on Titan base," Lisa ordered. "And Admiral Williams at the asteroid defense platform. Emergency priority." Within minutes, the holographic displays showed 2 other military commanders. Admiral Chen was a short man with careful eyes who controlled the fleet around Saturn. Admiral Williams was younger, with the kind of face that never seemed to worry about anything, even when he probably should. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lisa said, "we have a problem, a big one." She told them about the alien fleet and what they had told Captain Morrison. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. 200 ships, Admiral Chen said slowly. "We have maybe 60 capital ships in the entire defense fleet, and most of those are scattered across a dozen different systems." "It gets worse," Lisa said. "According to our intelligence, these aliens have been conquering other species for years. They have experience with this kind of thing. They know what they're doing." Admiral Williams leaned forward in his chair. "So what do we do? Run away? Pack up Earth and move it somewhere else?" Lisa smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "We do what humans have always done when someone bigger tries to push us around. We push back." She turned to the tactical display that showed human space. Red dots marked the location of every human military ship, while blue dots showed civilian vessels and colonies. There were so many blue dots and so few red ones. "Operation Hammerfall goes active as of right now," Lisa announced. All ships return to rally points. All civilian vessels clear the shipping lanes. And wake up the Special Projects Division. The Special Projects Division was something that most people in the military did not know about. For 3 years ever, since humans had first made contact with hostile aliens, a group of scientists and engineers had been working on weapons and tactics designed specifically for fighting enemies with better technology. They had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Deep in the asteroid belt, hidden inside rocks that looked like any other space debris, were shipyards that had been building ships in secret. These were not the sleek, efficient vessels that most human colonies used for trade and exploration. These were warships built for one purpose: fighting aliens who thought they were better than humans. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott was in the pilot ready room aboard the carrier ship Terran Resolve when the alert came through. The ready room was full of fighter pilots, all of them young and eager and convinced that they could fly through anything the universe threw at them. Ryan was older than most of them, 32 years old, with the kind of experience that came from fighting pirates in the outer systems. "Listen up," Ryan said to his squadron. "We just got word that we're going to war, not against other humans, this time. Against aliens who think we're going to roll over and play dead when they show up." The pilots looked at each other. Most of them had never fought aliens before. Hell, most of them had never seen an alien except in news broadcasts and educational videos. "What are we up against?" asked Lieutenant Karen Foster. She was one of the best pilots in the squadron, with reflexes that seemed almost superhuman and a complete inability to back down from a fight. "Species called the Zephyrians," Ryan said. "They have energy shields, quantum computers, and weapons that can probably take out one of our cruisers with a single shot. They've conquered 17 other species, and they think we're going to be number 18. "Are we?" asked another pilot. Ryan grinned. "That depends on whether they've ever fought anyone who learned how to fight by trying to kill each other for thousands of years. See, the thing about humans is that we've never had the luxury of being the biggest, strongest, or smartest. We've always had to be meaner, more stubborn, and more willing to do whatever it takes to win." On the bridge of the Terran Resolve, Captain Sam Williams watched as the hidden human fleet began to emerge from their hiding places. Ship after ship appeared on the tactical display, each one carrying weapons that no alien had ever seen before. The ships looked different from the smooth, artistic designs that most species preferred. Human warships were angular and brutal, covered with armor plates and weapon systems that had been designed by people who understood that space battles were not about looking pretty. Admiral Parker's voice came over the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is Fleet Admiral Parker. Today we face an enemy that thinks technology makes them invincible. They've forgotten what humans have never had the luxury of forgetting, that wars are won by will, by intelligence, and by the refusal to accept defeat." The Admiral paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with the kind of quiet anger that came from watching bullies threaten innocent people. "The Zephyrians came to our borders expecting to find easy prey. They think their shields and energy weapons make them superior to us. They're about to learn why that's a mistake. Every human ship in this fleet carries weapons specifically designed to counter their technology. Every crew has trained for this exact scenario, and every one of us remembers that our families and friends are depending on us to send these aliens back where they came from." Captain Williams felt his ship shudder as the massive engines came to full power. Around him, 60 human warships began moving toward the edge of the solar system, where the Zephyrian fleet was approaching the outer colonies. It was not as many ships as the aliens had, but it was enough. On Earth, in the deep bunkers where the government's emergency command center was located, President Maria Santos watched the fleet deploy on a wall-sized display. She was a small woman with the kind of voice that could fill a room and the kind of presence that made people want to follow her, even when she was asking them to do impossible things. "Madam President," said General Robert Kim, "the fleet is moving to intercept the alien force, but even with our new weapons, the odds are not good." President Santos nodded. She had read the reports. She knew what they were facing. "General, do you know what my grandfather used to tell me when I was a little girl?" "No, ma'am." He used to say that there's no such thing as impossible odds. There are just odds that require you to be more creative than the other guy. She turned to look at the general. Our people have been creative for a very long time. I think it's time to remind the galaxy why that matters. The human fleet moved through space like a pack of hunting wolves, each ship staying in formation, but ready to break away at a moment's notice. Behind them, Earth continued to turn in its orbit, blue and green and beautiful, home to 8 billion people who had no idea that their fate was about to be decided in the darkness between the stars. Admiral Parker stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Terran Defiance, and watched the tactical display as her ships approached the enemy. Soon, very soon, the Zephyrians would learn that pride was a dangerous thing when it made you underestimate your enemies, especially when those enemies were human. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human ships approach on his tactical display. The enemy vessels looked crude compared to Zephyrian technology, all angles and armor plating where they should have been smooth, curves and energy fields. 60 ships against his 200, it would barely qualify as a battle. Their formation is breaking apart, reported Captain Yexnall, studying the sensor readings. They appear to be scattering in different directions. Kextar made the sound that passed for laughter among his people. Fear. They realize they cannot stand against us, so they flee in panic. Order the fleet to pursue and destroy them individually. Each ship group will take a different target. The Zephyrian fleet, which had been moving in perfect formation like a single organism, suddenly broke apart. Groups of ships peeled off to chase the apparently fleeing human vessels. It was exactly what the humans wanted them to do. On the bridge of the Terran Defiance, Admiral Parker watched her plan unfold. "Signal all ships," she said calmly. "Execute Crazy Ivan in 3, 2, 1. Throughout human space, 60 warships suddenly reversed course. But instead of turning to fight the way the Zephyrians expected, they began employing tactics that no civilized species had ever used in space combat. Captain Dan Foster commanded the heavy cruiser Boston, and he was the first to engage the enemy. His ship had been pretending to flee toward a nearby asteroid field, drawing a group of 8 Zephyrian vessels after him. When he turned around, he did not slow down to fight. Instead, he accelerated. "All hands, brace for ramming speed," Foster announced over the ship's communication system. His crew had trained for this. They knew what was coming. The Boston struck the lead Zephyrian ship at nearly maximum velocity. The alien vessel's energy shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against several thousand tons of human warship moving at tremendous speed. The collision destroyed both ships instantly, but it also sent debris flying into the other Zephyrian vessels at lethal velocities. Admiral Kextar felt his flagship shudder as the shock wave from the explosion reached him. "What just happened?" he demanded. "The human ship?" "It deliberately collided with one of our vessels," Yexnall replied, his voice filled with disbelief. No civilized species would sacrifice a capital ship for such a minor tactical advantage. But the humans were just getting started. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Scott led his fighter squadron in an attack pattern that the Zephyrians had never seen before. Instead of engaging in traditional fighter combat, the human pilots swarmed around enemy ships like insects, too small and fast for the alien point defense systems to track effectively. "Remember your training," Ryan transmitted to his pilots. "They're big, they're powerful, and they think they're invincible. That makes them predictable." The human fighters deployed weapons that no other species had ever used in space: nuclear torpedoes. While other civilizations had moved beyond such crude devices in favor of clean energy weapons, humans had spent decades perfecting the art of nuclear destruction. The first torpedo struck a Zephyrian cruiser amidships. The nuclear explosion tore through the alien vessel's hull like paper, sending pieces of crystalline armor spinning away into space. More torpedoes followed, each one guided by pilots who had grown up hearing stories of Earth's most devastating wars. "Impossible," Admiral Kextar breathed as he watched his ships begin to die. "Nuclear weapons are primitive, barbaric. No advanced species would use such things." Captain Sam Williams, commanding the destroyer Relentless, emerged from behind a small moon with his railguns already charging. The Zephyrians had never encountered kinetic weapons of this magnitude. While they relied on energy-based armaments that could be deflected by shields, humans had perfected the art of throwing very large, very fast pieces of metal at their enemies. "Target their largest ship," Williams ordered his weapons officer. "Let's see how their shields handle some good old-fashioned kinetic energy." The tungsten slugs launched from the Relentless were accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When they struck the Zephyrian vessel, they punched through the energy shields as if they were not there. The alien defensive systems, designed to deflect particle beams and plasma bolts, were useless against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The Zephyrian ship's hull buckled and tore as the kinetic rounds tore through it. Atmosphere vented into space in glittering clouds. Internal explosions lit up the vessel from within as critical systems failed. "This is impossible," Kextar said again, but his voice was no longer confident. "Their weapons are primitive. They should not be able to penetrate our defenses." "Sir," Yexnel said quietly, "perhaps we underestimated them." The battle raged across the solar system as human ships employed every dirty trick they had learned in centuries of warfare. They used asteroid fields for cover, hiding behind rocks that the Zephyrian sensors had trouble tracking. They coordinated attacks that targeted specific weak points in alien ship design, information that human intelligence had gathered during months of careful observation. Commander Kate Lewis, serving aboard Admiral Parker's flagship, monitored the alien communications. The Zephyrians were beginning to panic as their supposedly superior technology proved inadequate against human tactics. "Admiral, they're requesting reinforcements," Kate reported, "and they're questioning their initial assessment of our capabilities." "Admiral," Parker smiled grimly, "too little, too late. Signal all ships. Implement Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more devastating than the first wave of attacks. Human ships began employing suicide runs, ramming attacks, and other strategies that the honor-bound Zephyrians considered insane. What the aliens did not understand was that humans had been perfecting the art of asymmetric warfare for millennia. The human destroyer New York, its hull cracked and its engines damaged, turned directly toward Admiral Kextar's flagship. Captain Tony Rodriguez, the ship's commander, opened a channel to the entire battle zone. "This is for every human colony you threatened," he transmitted, as his ship's engines reached critical overload. The New York struck the Dominion's wrath at nearly light speed. The resulting explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. Admiral Kextar, thrown from his command chair by the impact, watched in horror as his mighty flagship began to break apart around him. "Abandon ship," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. All hands abandoned ship. Escape pods began launching from the dying Zephyrian vessels as the human attack continued. The aliens had expected a quick, clean victory against a primitive species. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to have no concept of civilized warfare. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting, their crews trained in damage control procedures that the Zephyrians had never imagined. Alien vessels, built for overwhelming technological superiority, began to falter as the battle dragged on and their advantages proved meaningless against human determination. "Sir, the fleet is in retreat," Yexnal reported from an escape pod. Around him, the wreckage of what had once been the pride of the Zephyrian Navy drifted in the darkness of space. Admiral Kextar, floating in his own escape pod, stared at the human ships that continued to hunt down his fleeing vessels. In less than 6 hours, these primitive barbarians had destroyed more than half of his fleet. Ships that had conquered star systems had been reduced to glowing debris by creatures who should have been easy prey. "Signal all surviving vessels," he said finally. "Full retreat. Emergency jump to hyperspace." The remaining Zephyrian ships, their perfect formations now broken and scattered, began to disappear as they entered faster-than-light travel. But the humans were not content to simply drive them off. Admiral Parker's voice echoed across the human fleet. "All ships, pursue and harass. Don't let a single one of them return home thinking that humans are easy prey." The human ships gave chase, their smaller, more maneuverable vessels hunting down the fleeing Zephyrians like wolves pursuing a scattered herd. It was not enough to win the battle. They needed to send a message that would echo throughout the galaxy. As the last of the alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Admiral Parker stood on her bridge and surveyed the aftermath. Space was filled with the wreckage of Zephyrian vessels, their crystalline hulls now nothing more than glittering debris. "Casualty report," she ordered. 14 ships destroyed, 8 heavily damaged, came the reply. 3,217 casualties. It was a heavy price, but the message had been sent. The Zephyrian hegemony had learned that human space was not to be trifled with. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and Admiral Kextar was beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about warfare was wrong. From his escape pod, he watched human ships that should have been destroyed hours ago continue to fight with a determination that defied all logic. The human heavy cruiser Chicago had taken direct hits from 3 different Zephyrian energy cannons. Its hull was cracked open in a dozen places, atmosphere venting into space in long streams of frozen crystals. By all rights, the ship should have been a dead hulk drifting in space. Instead, its crew had somehow kept the engines running and the weapons firing. Captain Jennifer Hayes commanded the Chicago, and she had no intention of giving up. Her ship was dying around her, but her crew kept working with the kind of stubborn efficiency that humans had learned during centuries of desperate battles. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported her damage control officer. "We've lost life support to sections 12 through 18. Seal the sections and reroute power to the railguns," Jennifer ordered. "How long until the engines give out?" "Maybe 20 minutes, Captain. The containment field is fluctuating badly." Jennifer looked at the tactical display. 3 Zephyrian ships were moving to finish off her crippled vessel, their energy weapons already beginning to glow with deadly light. 20 minutes was more than enough time to take them with her. "All hands, this is the captain," she announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going to ram the lead enemy vessel. Anyone who wants to use the escape pods has 30 seconds to get to them." Nobody moved toward the escape pods. The Chicago's engines roared to life one last time, pushing the damaged ship toward the approaching Zephyrians at maximum speed. The alien vessels tried to alter course, but human ships were built for maneuverability, even when they were falling apart. The collision destroyed all 4 ships instantly, but the explosion took out 2 more Zephyrian vessels that had been moving to support their comrades. Admiral Kextar felt something cold settling in his stomach as he watched the tactical display. The humans were not fighting like any civilized species he had ever encountered. They were fighting like cornered animals, and cornered animals were dangerous in ways that tactical manuals never covered. On the bridge of the Terran Defiance, Admiral Parker was coordinating a battle unlike anything in recorded history. Her ships were outnumbered more than 3 to 1, but they were winning because they were fighting a war that the Zephyrians did not understand. "Signal the Anchorage and the Detroit," she ordered. "Have them execute a pincer movement on the enemy formation at Grid 77 Alpha." The 2 human destroyers moved to flank a group of Zephyrian ships that were trying to reform their battle line. But instead of engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, they began using tactics that had been developed during the bloodiest wars in human history. The Anchorage launched a spread of mines that looked like ordinary space debris until Zephyrian ships got close enough to trigger them. The explosions were not large enough to destroy the alien vessels, but they damaged sensors and communication equipment, making it impossible for the Zephyrians to coordinate their attacks. The Detroit used its smaller size to dart between the confused alien ships, firing kinetic rounds at point-blank range before disappearing behind the cover of wreckage and debris. The Zephyrians, trained to fight in organized formations with clear lines of engagement, had no idea how to deal with an enemy that refused to follow the rules. "Admiral, I'm intercepting Zephyrian communications," reported Commander Kate Lewis. "They're beginning to question their tactical doctrine. Some of their ship commanders are requesting permission to withdraw." Admiral Parker's smile was not pleasant. "Denied. Signal all ships. No quarter. We're not just fighting a battle here. We're fighting for the right to exist as a free species." "Lieutenant, Commander Ryan Scott's fighter squadron had taken heavy losses, but the surviving pilots continued to swarm around Zephyrian ships like angry wasps. Their tactics had evolved during the battle, becoming more aggressive and unpredictable with each passing hour." "Blue Leader, this is Blue 7, came a transmission from Lieutenant Karen Foster. "I've got a shot at the alien flagship's engine section. Ryan looked at his tactical display. Karen's fighter was damaged, its left wing completely gone, and its weapon systems operating on backup power. The shot she was talking about would require her to fly directly through the flagship's defensive fire. Negative, Blue 7. Too risky. Sir, with respect, everything we're doing today is too risky. But if I can take out their engines, you can finish them with the nuclear torpedoes. Ryan watched as Karen's fighter accelerated toward the massive Zephyrian vessel. Point defense lasers reached out for her, but she flew with the kind of skill that came from growing up in asteroid mining colonies where a single mistake meant death. Her fighter's remaining weapons fired at the exact moment she passed over the alien ship's engine section. The kinetic rounds, small but moving at tremendous velocity, punched through the crystalline armor and into the ship's power core. The Zephyrian flagship shuddered as internal explosions began to cascade through its engine compartments. Karen's fighter, damaged beyond repair by the defensive fire, spiraled away into space. "This is Blue 7, came her voice over the radio, strained but steady. "Mission accomplished. See you on the other side." Her fighter's reactor went critical, a moment later, adding its own explosion to the chaos that was consuming the Zephyrian flagship. Admiral Kextar felt his command ship dying around him as more explosions rocked the hull. The humans had done something that no enemy had ever managed before. They had crippled the pride of the Zephyrian fleet using nothing but primitive weapons and suicidal tactics. "Sir, the engine core is going critical," reported his engineering officer. "We have maybe 5 minutes before containment fails." Kextar looked around the bridge at his surviving officers. These were some of the best military minds in the Zephyrian hegemony, veterans of a dozen successful campaigns. Now they looked lost and confused, unable to understand how their technological superiority had become meaningless. All hands abandoned. "Ship," he ordered quietly. "Signal the fleet. Full retreat." The order went out across the remaining Zephyrian vessels, and one by one they began to disengage from combat. But the humans were not content to let them go quietly. Captain Sam Williams, commanding the destroyer Relentless, watched the alien ships trying to withdraw. His own vessel was heavily damaged, with most of its armor gone and half its weapons offline. But the engine still worked, and that was all he needed. "Signal the fleet," he transmitted. "The enemy is trying to run. Don't let them." Human ships began pursuing the retreating Zephyrians with a determination that bordered on obsession. They had lost friends and comrades in this battle, and they were not about to let the aliens escape without paying a price for their arrogance. The pursuit lasted for 3 hours, as human vessels chased fleeing Zephyrian ships across the solar system. They used every trick they had learned: ramming attacks, nuclear mines, kinetic bombardment, and tactics that no civilized species would ever consider. By the time the surviving alien vessels finally jumped to hyperspace, Admiral Kextar's mighty fleet had been reduced to fewer than 40 ships. The rest were either destroyed or so badly damaged that they would never fight again. On Earth, President Maria Santos stood in the emergency command center and watched the tactical display as the last Zephyrian ship disappeared into faster-than-light travel. Around her, military officers and government officials were cheering, but she remained quiet. "Madam President," said General Robert Kim, "we've won. The aliens are retreating." President Santos nodded slowly. "Yes, we've won this battle, but the war is just beginning." She turned to address the room. "The Zephyrians came here thinking we were weak. They've learned differently. But they're not the only alien species out there, and word of this battle is going to spread. Some will see it as a reason to leave us alone. Others will see it as a challenge." Admiral Parker's voice came over the communication system from her flagship. "Mr. President, the enemy fleet has been defeated. Our losses were heavy, but we've sent a message that will be heard across the galaxy." "What kind of message, Admiral?" "That human space is not to be trifled with. That we're not the easy prey that everyone seems to think we are. And that anyone who wants to test our resolve is welcome to try." The President smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was satisfied. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the only language that mattered. The language of force applied with intelligence, determination, and the uniquely human refusal to accept inevitable defeat. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what this dangerous new species would do next. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Kextar knelt before the Zephyrian High Council in the Great Crystal Chamber on the homeworld of Zephyr Prime. The chamber was designed to intimidate, with walls that rose hundreds of feet into the air and crystalline formations that caught and reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Kextar's once proud bearing was gone, replaced by the hunched posture of someone who had seen his entire world view destroyed in a single day. Of the 200 ships he had led into human space, only 37 had returned, all damaged, all carrying crews who spoke in whispers about the impossible things they had seen. High Counselor Vexarun was ancient even by Zephyrian standards. His scales dulled with age, but his eyes still sharp with intelligence. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber like the sound of breaking glass. "Explain to us, Admiral, how the mighty Zephyrian hegemony was defeated by a species that has barely left their home star system." Kextar's voice was barely above a whisper. "They do not fight as civilized species fight, High Counselor. They employ weapons and tactics that defy conventional military doctrine. They sacrifice themselves willingly for tactical advantage. They turn their own weaknesses into strengths." Another member of the council, Counselor Zexamira, leaned forward in her crystal throne. "You speak of primitives with crude technology. How could such beings defeat our energy shields and quantum targeting systems?" "Their weapons are not energy-based," Kextar replied. "They use kinetic projectiles accelerated to tremendous speeds. Our shields, designed to deflect particle beams and plasma bolts, offer no protection against solid matter moving at near light velocity." The council chamber fell, silent as the implications sank in. The Zephyrian military doctrine was based on energy shields and energy weapons, a combination that had proven unbeatable against every other species they had encountered. The idea that someone would still use kinetic weapons was so primitive, so barbaric that no one had considered it a threat. "They also use nuclear weapons," Kextar continued, "not as strategic bombardment tools, but as tactical weapons deployed by individual fighters. They contaminate entire battle zones with radiation and seem to consider this acceptable." High Counselor Vexarun made a sound that was like wind blowing through crystal formations. "Nuclear weapons. We abandoned such crude devices 2,000 years ago." "Yes, High Counselor. But the humans have perfected them. They use them in ways we never considered, with yields calibrated for specific tactical situations. And their pilots." Kextar's voice trailed off. "What about their pilots?" "They fly into certain death without hesitation. I watched human fighters attack our point defense systems, knowing they would be destroyed, just to clear a path for their comrades. I saw ship commanders ram their vessels into our formations rather than accept defeat. They fight like—" He searched for the right words. "Like animals defending their young." The council deliberated for 3 days. Representatives from across the Zephyrian hegemony attended emergency sessions as reports came in from other parts of the galaxy. Word of the human victory was spreading faster than anyone had expected, carried by traders and diplomats who had witnessed the aftermath of the battle. On the 3rd day, High Counselor Vexarun announced the council's decision. "The expansion into human space is hereby suspended indefinitely. All military operations in that sector are cancelled. We will establish a buffer zone of 50 light-years around human territory and designate it as a no-contact zone." The decision sent shock waves through Zephyrian society. For the first time in their recorded history, they had encountered a species that refused to acknowledge their superiority. More disturbing was the realization that their entire military philosophy might be flawed. Meanwhile, on Earth, Fleet Admiral Lisa Parker stood before the United Earth Council, delivering her after-action report. The council chamber was much smaller than the Zephyrian Crystal Palace, but it was filled with people who understood the magnitude of what had just happened. The enemy operated under the assumption that technological superiority equals military superiority, she explained. They had forgotten what humans have never had the luxury of forgetting, that wars are won by will, ingenuity, and the refusal to accept defeat. President Maria Santos nodded from her seat at the center of the council chamber. What are our current losses, Admiral? 14 ships destroyed, 8 more so heavily damaged they'll need complete rebuilds. 3,217 casualties with 896 killed in action. The chamber was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed the numbers. It was a heavy price for victory, but it was also far less than anyone had expected when facing a fleet of 200 alien warships. Counselor David Chen, representing the outer colonies, raised his hand. Admiral, what about the other alien empires? Won't they see this as a threat? Admiral Parker's expression was grim but determined. Some will. The Andromedan Trade Consortium has already sent diplomatic messages expressing interest in peaceful cooperation. They're traders, not conquerors, and they understand the value of dealing with species that can defend themselves. And the others? The hegemony itself has withdrawn to their core systems and appears to be reassessing their expansion policies. But we're also getting reports of increased activity from other powers. The Void Stalkers have been repositioning their fleets along our borders. The Crystal Empire has been unusually quiet, which usually means they're planning something. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been evacuated from the monitoring station before the battle, spoke up from his seat in the observer section. Are we ready for them? Admiral Parker smiled, and this time it was not entirely grim. Captain, the Zephyrians thought they were facing a primitive species with crude weapons. They learned that human creativity and determination can overcome technological advantages. Any other species that wants to test that lesson is welcome to try. President Santos stood up, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a turning point in human history. We have announced our presence to the galaxy not as victims or subjects, but as equals. We have shown that Earth and her colonies will not be conquered or enslaved. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. But this is just the beginning. Word of our victory will spread, and some will see it as a challenge rather than a warning. We must be prepared for what comes next. Within months, reports began, filtering in from across the galaxy. The news of the Zephyrian defeat had indeed spread, carried by trade ships and diplomatic missions to every corner of known space. Some species, like the peaceful ethereal collective, sent messages of congratulation and offers of cultural exchange. Others, like the militaristic Crimson Empire, began testing human defenses with probe ships and border incidents. But there were darker reports as well. Ancient powers that had slumbered for millennia were suddenly taking notice of the humans who had achieved what no other young species had managed: the decisive defeat of a galactic superpower through sheer audacity and refusal to surrender. Deep in the archives of the Galactic Library, automated systems began cross-referencing historical data. The last time a primitive species had defeated an advanced military force through unconventional tactics was over 50,000 years ago, and it had marked the beginning of a galactic war that lasted for centuries. Admiral Parker stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt monitoring station on Kepler 442b, looking out at the stars where debris from the Zephyrian fleet still drifted in the darkness. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, promoted to commander after her actions during the battle, approached with the latest intelligence reports. Admiral, we're detecting increased alien activity along all our borders. Multiple species are repositioning their fleets. Admiral Parker nodded slowly. Let them come. The Zephyrians learned that human space is not to be trifled with. Any other species that wants to test that lesson will learn the same thing. She turned to look at the young commander. Amy, do you know what the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is? No, ma'am. A species that has nothing left to lose and refuses to give up. The Zephyrians came here expecting to find easy prey. Instead, they found predators. And now every other power in the galaxy has to decide whether we're a threat they can ignore or a challenge they need to meet. Commander Rodriguez looked out at the stars, where human patrol ships now moved in regular formations, their weapons ready and their crews alert. What do you think they'll decide? Admiral Parker's smile was not pleasant. Some will choose wisely and leave us alone. Others will let their pride make the same mistake the Zephyrians made. She paused, watching a human destroyer pass by the station's windows. And when they do, they'll learn why you should never underestimate a species that learned how to fight by trying to kill each other for 10,000 years. The stars continued their eternal dance, but now they held a new player. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the only language that mattered, the language of force applied with intelligence, determination, and the uniquely human refusal to accept defeat. The pride of the Zephyrian hegemony had led them to underestimate humanity, and it had cost them everything. But for humanity, the victory was just the beginning of a larger story.